Hi, I am Lexi McKee-Hemenway. I work with the Iowa Environmental Council as campaign organizer. I specifically work on the Clean Up Mid-Am campaign that is directly looking at the coal pits that are in Iowa. We still have several here that are causing quite a bit of pollution with health effects and negative environmental issues as well. But tonight, I'm just here as a local community organizer. Also, I'm not an expert on anything. I can always point you in the right direction, though. So I might have to phone a couple friends from the audience to help fill in some information, especially when we get to the minutes. But yeah, so thank you guys so much for letting me talk with you. And like I was saying earlier, there are some handouts up here if you would like to take those with you. A couple stickers, a postcard that you can send to Iowa DNR, and then PM 2.5 information, a health report that came out last May. And then there's also a little brochure about the Clean Up Mid-Am campaign that I work on. But we will hop into the next slide. So this slide, I'm not going to ask you to answer these questions right now, but I want you to start thinking about them. So when you think of Sioux City, what are the first few words that come to mind? Or images, or memories, thoughts, smells even, because that's often associated with Sioux City. What do you think of the environment or the water quality here? And what's your favorite part? What would you change? So think about all of these things while we talk about some of these issues that we see here. I especially was looking at the industries here in Sioux City because if any of you were here last week or watched the live stream or the recording, David had mentioned that Sioux City actually, we have some of, we compete with larger cities, much larger than Sioux City, on being #1 in industrial parks essentially. So we compete with major cities on this continent. I was really shocked to hear that, but it also makes sense when you're driving around. I also want you to take note of this picture. This is something that I find to be really interesting. The sign is now no longer there, but Mid-American had this sign that said "Welcome to Sioux City." And I'm going to talk about them a little bit tonight. So yeah, it's just kind of interesting. Just keep that in mind. But we'll go to the next slide, and I don't know how well you guys can see these, but these are headlines that I found while searching pollution in Sioux City, issues in Sioux City, environmental catastrophes in Sioux City. So we've got wastewater discharge in Woodbury County, and that was November 7th, 2024, where we had 2 million gallons of untreated wastewater that were discharged into Bacon Creek. That was due to a levee failure. There's also April 6, 2023, proposal to discharge contaminated water into the Missouri River. Mid-American was trying to dump coal leachate into the Missouri River directly before, processing it further. We've got Iowa nitrogen pollution. The water is getting worse. And that is bolded, and it says Iowa is responsible for 55% of Missouri River nitrogen load. That is what contributes to the dead zone, like what Jessica had been mentioning earlier. There's just so many things happening. It's quite shocking, but it's also not a unique issue. It's not unique to just Northwest Iowa. It's all across Iowa. It's all across the United States. So it's really cool that we have people who showed up tonight who want to talk about these things and learn more about it and protect our local waterways. But I want to ask you guys, have you've heard of all of these, right? Has anybody heard of these things that have been happening around here?
I remember when the wastewater discharge happened in November.
Yeah. It was kind of shocking. I was like, oh my gosh. Thankfully, I don't think any fish died. Last summer when a fertilizer plant forgot to turn off their spouts and it killed all the fish, snakes, frogs, snails, everything that you can think of in that river. But also think about that flooding that we had last summer. All of that water can go into any, trash pile. It can sweep through our wastewater, area. So those are also very concerning things. Is there anything from these headlines that really pops out at you that concerns you the most?
Cargill,
Cargill?
a $10,000 fine, that's nothing to them. Yeah. It's got a part to take it.
Yeah, it's dropped in the bucket for them. And you said body parts?
Whatever.
Yep, the blood and body parts. There was a really concerning article I found about that, citing that Tyson alone dumped, I think it was like 37.5 billion pounds or billion tons of wastewater throughout the United States. And actually, one of the meatpacking plants in Dakota City, Nebraska, is one of the biggest polluters when it comes to meatpacking industry in the nation. Anybody else want to throw anything out? That's okay if you don't. We can move on to the next slide then. So we are going to be looking at Woodbury Industries. So like I said earlier, Woodbury County has a very large number of industries that are here. Predominantly, we see meatpacking plants. We've got a fertilizer plant here. I don't know if any of you were around in the 90s, but there's actually an explosion out in Salem because of one of those fertilizer plants. Lots of ag processing. So when you think of your grain, soybean, ethanol, got a lot of that here. And we also have 2 coal plants here. So all of these are linked to environmental issues, health issues, and they can be prevented or curbed, but a lot of people don't know what exactly goes into each one of these. So when we're looking at meatpacking plants, it's typically discharge that's untreated waste. It's including the blood, the chemicals, and that typically goes into your local waterways, which then connect to larger waterways like the Missouri into the Mississippi, and then further out to the ocean. And we especially see this in low-income communities. So whenever we are looking at environmental issues, it will almost always be linked to environmental justice issues, where low-income and marginalized communities are feeling the brunt of those negative environmental impacts. But it's also hard to get out of that if you're low income. You can't just move away from that pollution. So when we look at fertilizer plants, that is specifically tied to nitrate runoff, which I don't know if any of you guys have heard about it or concerned, but Iowa was number 2 in the nation for cancer rates. And we have magically seemed to say that it's because of binge drinking. I don't think it's because of binge drinking. Like JD had said before, I think Wisconsin would beat us there, So not only does it cause runoff, but it also can contaminate groundwater and surface water. And then, like it was mentioned before, the runoff promotes algae blooms, and that again leads to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And it's also worsened by rainfall, flooding, and it's linked to climate change. I mean, that's just point blank period. That's an issue that we see here. Then if we look at ag processing facilities, again, it links back to nitrate pollution from agricultural runoff. And it also starts to create, it can create, not always, but a strain on local water systems. And it can also degrade aquatic ecosystems because of those pollutions that are being put into the water. I know for sure with like coal-fired power plants, and I'm sure that this is probably true of other, sources like ag processing, fertilizer. But once there's certain chemicals that hit the water, it changes and it becomes more toxic. So I think of methylmercury specifically. Methylmercury, if that becomes an issue in your waterways, your fish will start to consume it. How many of you eat the fish out of the Missouri River?
I have in the past.
Well, in the past, that's a little scary. I can't lie. I'm happy you're here with us though. So I would not eat the fish out of the Missouri River, you guys. I wouldn't swim in the Missouri River because of how many things are dumped into our water. If you talk to anybody who has kayaked down that, it's concerning. It's very, very concerning. It's very scary. But it's not only us in this room who are affected by that. If you are pregnant and you are eating that fish, you're breathing those things in, it's going to affect, that kid that you have, because you have a higher chance of the, heavy metals lodging in those fatty organs. But it's the same for you. Heavy metals, they're lodging into your fatty organs, because of the things that you breathe in. So coal-fired power plants, there's a lot of stuff that emits a lot of air pollutants like sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxides, and it affects air quality and human health. Then there's also the coal ash disposal, which is the really big issue. We have hundreds of acres of unlined coal ash landfills in Iowa that seep into our groundwater. Or like I said earlier, it can turn to fly ash, it can be carried by a flood, and then it starts to go down the streams. But again, like anything that hits that air and then it hits the water, it can also change into a different contaminant. And of course, all of these things contribute to greenhouse gases. So it is exacerbating climate change, which then in turn makes our weather patterns significantly worse. So it's a lot to take in all at once, but it's important to start thinking about it because we can do things as long as we work together. So when we look specifically at health and climate change, I've been mentioning it quite a bit, but they're all connected. So like with meat packing plants, we've got the livestock production too that generates a significant amount of methane, which is a greenhouse gas. Meat processing requires a large amount of energy with water, chemicals. So that adds to carbon emissions. It's also the transportation, the refrigeration. So every process adds to the carbon footprint. Fertilizer plants, the production of nitrogen-based fertilizers emits nitrous oxides also, which is, again, a greenhouse gas that is nearly 300 times more potent than CO2. There's also the manufacturing that's very intensive and often relies on fossil fuels. There's the over-application of fertilizer that leads to runoff, which if anybody went to the Chris Jones conversation a few weeks back that was held by the Sierra Club and League of Women Voters, Chris had mentioned that, you can have successful yields for farming as long as you are doing crop rotations and then you're planting other plants together that can help each other. And that would really help with the issue that we see with nitrates in Iowa and everywhere else. Then we've also got the agricultural processing is the same kind of issue, just over and over again. And the monoculture farming that contributes to soil degradation and reducing carbon sequestration capacity. So, I'm sorry to say that it's a lot of the same stuff. They all kind of produce the same issue in the end. In Sioux City, from what I know for sure, we have one air monitor here that is put in by Iowa DNR that is not in a place where we see highest asthma rates. With our water quality, I don't think that there's been any testing recently. Does anybody know if we've had recent water testing? I know that annually the EPA, you have to send in information yearly, but it's also something that we don't like to talk about widely to get things done, but we don't like to complain about it, I think. And I haven't even touched on the fact that a lot of houses here in Sioux City also have lead pipes, which it's not required by law to disclose that. It's not required by law to replace those if you buy a house. So these are all things that continue to compound. But like I said, there are ways to fix this issue. We'll go to the next slide and talk about who to get involved with and what initiatives are happening here. So I know I kind of zipped through that, but I want to just underscore the importance of showing up to conversations like this tonight. So I have protecting our waterways as our number one way to get involved right now. Just showing up, being a part of the conversation, learning more about it, and then wanting to do a project that also brings attention to our waterways, our air quality, the issues that we're having with our soil. is a really big deal. There's also the Northwest Iowa Group Sierra Club. I see a couple Sierra Club members in here tonight. Please come to Fourth Tuesday tomorrow. We're going to be picking up trash at Stone State Park, I believe. So if you want more information, you can talk with Jeannie. And we do some really cool stuff there. Iowa Environmental Council, I work with IEC. We are doing a lot of research right now. We just launched a huge cancer project to investigate where the cancer is coming from. How can we mitigate it? What are the next steps there? But pretty much any question you have about what to do with funding, or you just want more info on basics about the environment, you can always come to IEC. Red Sky Nation is also here. I'm just shouting out everybody who's a part of this project because they are truly doing the groundwork. So Trisha's an awesome resource. She's a great organizer. She knows so much stuff. She can also connect you with a ton of people, and she's just a cool person to be around. Vanguard Arts, and the same with the Daily Collective, who is hosting us here. These are places to go to host events like this. Get involved, show up at things. There's always something happening. It's a welcoming space. Also, Sioux City Environmental Advisory Board. Run, get on the board. There's a few seats open. Be a part of everything. If you can, even better, be a part of our zoning commission. Get on boards, get on the commissions, just do it. It really does change the kinds of things that can happen here in Sioux City. There's also Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement. They are based here in Sioux City. They are based in Des Moines, but they have members here, and they do a lot of stuff specifically with factory farms and any issues related to corporations being a big bully. Because we've got a lot of corporations here in Iowa that are big bullies. And we see a lot of them here in Sioux City. Their headquarters aren't here, but they do have factories here that are harming us and harming our environment directly here in Sioux City. And we've also got Sioux Pride. I know that seems random, but creating community right now is really important, and in the environmental space especially, because it affects everybody. You can't outrun climate change, and you can't outrun the pollution that you experience. And then also Clean Up Mid-Am. That's the one that I work with. I can always talk with you about that afterwards. And like I said earlier, we are specifically looking at the issues with the coal plants right now that with American homes. I also just want to point out this little picture here. You can't really see it very well, but this is a thing I saw on my walk, and it says, "No dumping, flows to Missouri River," and it's a picture of a fish. Some of these have popped off over the years, so you can't find them, and then what did they do? They fell directly into the waterways that we're trying to not pollute. That's okay though. We're learning from those mistakes of the past, and that's important. But I thought that it was kind of cool to just see that out in the wild after I got involved in this project. And I wanted to show you guys what it looked like. It's very simple, and I think that we could be a little bit more extra, if you will, with the project that we're working on. Are there any questions so far? Okay, we will move into the environmental myths then. We're unlearning environmental myths. So this one was hard. I had a hard time trying to rack my brain, like what are the environmental myths that I've heard or paid attention to, or like kind of struck me over the head. And it was kind of difficult to find those, but I do know that they are dangerous. There are people who have come up to me in situations where I've been tabling, and they've told me, like, you're killing people by saying that you want to have clean energy, or these wind turbines are killing people. And it's very random. It's a very strange conversation to have because they genuinely do not know that they have false information. They live in a different reality. And it's okay. We can figure out a path forward, but we can't be spreading misinformation, especially when it's really damaging like that. And like this says, these myths oftentimes are also an oversimplification of a very complex issue, which is everything related to the environment, clean energy, even native planting. people don't look at the larger picture and then zoom in to really understand why it might be confusing or where they got the wrong information from. And it's also very harmful because it can delay a lot of really great progress. And we've actually seen that here in our own community directly. So we'll go on to the next slide. And this slide is basically just underscoring that none of this information is new, basically. This is not new knowledge. Many Indigenous and Native American tribes have been, teaching this before. And it's really important that we acknowledge this, that it's not new. So especially our conservation practices that we are relearning today, they are rooted in Indigenous knowledge systems that have long been unrecognized by the environmental community, by the government, and just in like everyday issues that we have that could have been prevented. So I think that it's important that we recognize that Native communities have always seen the connection between humans, land, water, plants, animals, and specifically creating community. Communities are really a big part of actually being able to fix our climate issues, our water issues. And I did put like this random, like these are common beliefs that I've heard before, or things that I was trying to think, where have I know I've learned about these, but where have I learned about these? Like Jessica mentioned earlier, it might be school, it might be the news, it might be random conversations, TV shows. Like some of these, it's very interesting, like conservation is a new idea, or this is like,
Yeah. I have this random specific memory that I think about when I think about Unlearning. Like before this whole environmental project, I remember going on a field trip in 4th grade to a farm, and they were telling us about soybeans, and they were telling us about how they use pesticides to help the plants grow to make everything better. And like how I didn't think about challenging that idea for like several years until something else like was presented to me. But like, yeah, just that simple fact, like they were telling us how great pesticides are, which seems like counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But that was like, I don't know, 20 years ago.
and imagine how much longer those myths has been going on for. It's kind of crazy. Does anybody else have an example of something like that?
Oh, I know. Wind turbines mess up the solar or something with the wheels. Their sonar. That's it. Yeah.
I never heard that one. It's crazy. I mean, these are very random things, or even like small things. Like the fire is always destructive. I was like, I think I was in like 8th grade or went to, it was some sort of forest. They're like, actually, fire is pretty good because it makes you redistribute the seeds. And I was like, I've never heard that before because I grew up in the Black Hills. So every time that there was a fire, they're like, oh no, it's the end of the world. It is not great, but it is important to have things like that happen. So these were just some things that I was like, interesting. We've been taught this our whole lives. No, I can't say nobody, but a lot of people don't really question it because it doesn't directly affect them usually, or they don't think that it does, which is actually a myth that we will dive into. So, are there any comments that you guys have, or any other myths that you want to mention?
I just like the one thing I want to say is like when it comes to like construction or redoing like an old building or something and really pushing for and wanting environmental like eco-friendly practices, it is so hard to push for that. And I came across a lot of contractors who would say, oh, that's too hard, that's too difficult. And so there's a lot of pushback when it comes to like there are communities doing this and they're building things with these materials, right? And it's just like coming up against that mindset of it's too hard, it's too difficult, when there's other communities just fully thriving through these practices.
I think that's a really good point, and unfortunately, that is something that every single thing that has to do with the environment, it is always a push and pull. And it is because they say, like, this is too hard, this is too much money. And it seems like with every myth that I'm about to bring up, that has been one of the big issues is, oh, this is too hard, this is too much of a change, this is too expensive. There is one, though, which is flat out crazy, but that is a really good point, Sam. And to that, I say it's not too hard to start something new that's going to save us a lot in the future. Climate resilience is something that we need right now and we need to start planning for. So show up at city meetings and demand that that happens, or take the survey that's floating around. Please take the survey that's floating around too. We're going to hop into the next myth. For the number one myth that I've heard is that nitrates are necessary for farming. This is one that I've been thinking about a lot since I went to the Chris Jones conversation. I just found it to be so interesting. Like he said, when they stopped over fertilizing and using all these nitrates for their crops, that they actually did better. And I was like, then why are we constantly hearing that we need to use these harmful chemicals? It's just like, what is it? Big weed spray? What is it? Big radon? I don't know. Is that what's, not radon, what is it? Roundup. Thank you. I could not think of it. It starts with an R. Big Roundup. They're like, weeds are horrible. This is bad. Get rid of the dandelions in your yard. No, we don't need to do that always. We really don't. But nitrates specifically, like mentioned earlier, they cause a lot of issues. So the solutions for nitrate issues, causing cancer or harming ecosystems, all of these different things. It's not the only benefit, but also farming can be done in a much more sustainable way overall by rotational grazing, cover crops, and regenerative practices, and a push for regenerative agriculture would be massive. Now, there is a common belief that farmers do not want to do that change, and I think that might be true for some loud few, but not all. Because if there are farmers in Georgia who are saying we need to start working with the environment, so why we wouldn't have that happen here in Iowa. It just is about having those one-on-one conversations, though, and figuring out what's the best way to go about this. I don't know if anybody here has more information on that, because like I said, I'm not an agricultural expert. But these are some things, like this is a huge myth that I see here in Iowa.
Yeah, unless I don't remember the number exactly, but David said that like 90% of Iowa is farmland in the summer, something like that. It was like 80 or 90%.
Two main crops too.
Too many crops.
Two main crops: soybeans, corn. So monoculture, nitrates, and a lot of the chemicals. A lot of the farmers didn't notice it maybe, but they became owned by not just Monsanto but Bayer, who bought Monsanto, I believe. So they're owned by they're like locked in. So whether you think of trying something else or not, it becomes almost impossible to switch and try a new process. That's what so those nitrates there again run off into the streams.
It's a
farming processes are backwards.
Yeah, they are backwards. That's a good way to put it, Jamie. And it's really unfortunate that they're locked into those contracts. It's very predatory. I'm not quite sure what the answer is to that there, but I feel like there's got to be some way out of it. My one sliver of hope that I've seen with that is that the Cancer Gag Act it didn't make it through funnel. It's dead for now. Hopefully it stays dead. Where they were basically trying to say that these large pesticide companies and plants, fertilizer plants, all these things are not responsible or liable for any issues that arise from it, basically in so many words. So I think that there's more of a conversation that's happening now than there was prior, and that is exciting, and that gives me a glimmer of hope, and I hope it gives you guys a glimmer of hope too. Our next myth is a little bit more lighthearted. So this is the belief that a well-kept lawn is environmentally friendly. So that's like your traditional grass lawn. I don't know if anybody knows the history of the grass lawn. It didn't used to be like that though. It's a status symbol because you don't have to grow your own food, which is ridiculous. Everybody should have some sort of garden or, have some native plants. Just start small. So there's a belief that you need to have these synthetic fertilizers or these pesticides to keep all these things out and have this 1-inch green yard all the way across. But I hate to break it to you, a native plant yard is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Not to single Jeannie out because she's got a really cool yard because it's native plants and it's really pretty. And when you walk through, you've got butterflies and bees and birds and all these pollinators and so much life that's there. It's very, very cool. And you can start small. Plus, there's a benefit of not having to break out your lawnmower all the time. But you can start small with like a corner in your yard. And there's a few plants that I started to look at that I personally want to put in, like butterfly weed or wild bergamot. There's also a few different types of coneflowers, black-eyed Susans. There's many beautiful grasses, flowers that you can put in. Also trees. Have any of you guys seen or smelled Bradford pear tree?
What?
The Bradford pear tree? I've got 2 in my yard.
The Bradford?
Bradford pear tree.
The ones that are all over.
Yeah, the invasive kind. Yes, they're all over Sioux City and they smell horrible, you guys. Do not get up close to them. But that's an invasive tree. Like, that's another common belief is we need to have more trees, but let's be selective with how many trees we put in and which ones they are. Let's make them native trees. I know that Gage, she gave me the idea actually to mention this because it's a very simple thing. And it's something that we've also seen as a local thing. There has been a push for an ordinance for like a no-mow month, which helps invite more pollinators into your yard and more little critters, and that helps the environment with the ecosystem there. Also having small prairies, like little pocket prairies, that also means putting your native plants there. The native plants, they aren't messy, they aren't a ton of work. Just let them be, just let them grow, and then you will start to see more of those cool things coming back. So I think that there's a few people here who would love to give more information on that as well. So let's move into our next myth, which is the big one that I hear a lot about around here. Wind and solar are X, Y, and Z. I put X, Y, and Z because there's always something. It might be that they're unreliable. It harms the ecosystem. It hurts the economy, or it causes cancer. The cause of cancer one really drives me crazy because it's just kind of bizarre. I don't know why. I've only heard of that around here though. It's a very popular belief, I guess. When we're looking at this unreliable myth, wind turbines are too unreliable because the wind doesn't always blow. Well, modern energy grids do balance that out. Also, I don't know if you guys have driven across Iowa recently, but I have never been here that it wasn't windy. It is always windy here, and it's also our strongest it's the strongest form of energy when we have high demand for energy. Battery storage is also improving significantly, so it can help take some of that energy, store it for later. And kind of the same thing is said for solar. It's like, well, the sun doesn't always shine, and that's fine. Solar panels still generate electricity. There still can be put next to a battery, connect that power directly there, and they actually work a little bit better when it's a bit cooler outside. So it's just kind of interesting that some folks have said that, but there's various studies from the Department of Energy and major universities that show with smart grid updates, storage in diverse sources, and looking more into battery storage, that renewables can be the #1 provider of energy in our nation, not only here in Iowa, but everywhere, which actually here in Iowa, we produce enough electricity to be completely 100% renewable, but the companies who have that ability sell our energy to other states to make a profit, and then they continue to burn the coal that harms us. I've heard that it like harms the ecosystem. They're like, yeah, well, this was crazy. They leak oil. Wind turbines leak oil, and so do solar panels, and they can bust, and they kill birds, and it was just kind of crazy. The number one killer of birds in the United States. Do you guys know what it is?
Cats.
Cats. Keep your cats inside, you guys. Like, oh, they kill the birds. It's not the wind turbines. It's not the solar panels. Or, another thing is that they take up too much space. And, they do use some space, but a lot of it's very compatible with farming. It's also not that big of an eyesore, not in comparison to a gas plant or a coal plant. You guys can go take a look at them yourself and see if you want to stare at that all day. But also, we've seen that farming, grazing with ecosystems, these animals don't have a problem being around there. Plus, there's also rooftops. Let's just start putting solar everywhere. Let's put them on our rooftops. Let's start to really incentivize that. And then there's like the other issue of that people think that over the span of time it takes up a carbon footprint, and this one's not quite as popular around Sioux City, but I was reading some about that like on Reddit, and I'm like, okay, interesting. Over the lifetime of a wind turbine or a solar panel, it is going to cut the huge greenhouse gas emissions and pollution significantly in comparison to other energy options. When we look at the economy, there's a fear of job losses because of the fossil fuel industries, or there's also the belief that there will be massive layoffs. But the reality is that clean energy is one of the fastest and largest growing sectors right now in our country, and with wind and solar creating more jobs that are lost with fossil fuels being phased out, that's huge. Like, it's a huge industry that's right now we are not taking advantage of enough, but also that is on the corporations to hold those conversations. We talk about what a clear transition will look like and to keep people involved in that. And then we have the issue with cancer. So the claim that wind and solar energy causes cancer is a completely baseless claim. There's no scientific evidence that has ever found that this is a real thing. I don't know how many of you guys watch some of our county meetings or our zoning meetings, but there's a very large, I'm not going to say very large, it's a very loud group that shows up and says that wind causes cancer and that it kills people. And they will cite stuff like it messes with the EMFs or electromagnetic fields, or what Trisha was saying, like solar flares and all of this crazy stuff, but there's literally no studies that link any of that. It's just kind of bizarre. And it's the same with solar panels. Some people say that they have chemicals that radiate from them or radiation, but that is not true. That has never been found to be true. There's tons of credible evidence supporting that wind and solar are very safe to be around. If it were an issue, I can almost guarantee that they would not exist, especially not here in Iowa, where it seems to be an issue or an eyesore for people. And again, I'm just going to underscore that wind and solar are not linked to the high rates of cancer or asthma or COPD that we see with other options. So our next slide is environmental impacts don't affect me. This is something I hear a lot, not necessarily with the folks that I meet here in Sioux City, because oftentimes I'm in a meeting talking about environmental issues. But in the past, I have met people who are like, no, like climate change isn't that big of a deal, or yeah, I mean, I don't see the pollution, it doesn't like hurt me. But it does affect you. Every single person in this room, when you step outside, what do you think you're going to be breathing in? What kind of water are you drinking? Does anybody know someone who was affected by the flood last summer? So there's a few of us, yeah. Does anybody know somebody with asthma? Almost everyone. Does anybody know someone with cancer? Yeah, almost everybody. So these are things because these are happening because of the things that are happening in our environment. It's kind of insane to think that what's happening at such a large scale, like climate change, isn't affecting us. We might not directly see it, but we will all feel it, or your neighbor will feel it, or your future grandchild will feel it. It's also just like really insane. There was a quote last summer that was kind of floating around after there were those huge, terrible floods that hit Appalachia, which was crazy. Somebody said, "You will continue to watch the massive destruction from climate change happen through your screen, and it will become closer and closer and closer until you are the person that's recording it and asking for help." And we saw that. It was very alarming to see that we had massive hurricanes hitting mountains. We had wildfires in the west. We had flooding that we call biblical flooding, by the way, so it shouldn't happen often, but it will happen again soon. We had massive tornado outbreak systems. Did any of you guys see the hail from Hinton on Friday? It was terrifying. Baseball-sized hail. That's not normal. I don't care what anybody says, this is not normal. It's affecting us. So I think that was like the biggest thing that, like, reading through, like, wow, like some people really don't think that this has anything to do with them, but it does. And every decision that we make every day also can change those outcomes. But we are going to move into our closing questions real quick. So again, those things that I was asking you earlier, the words that come to mind, the images that come to mind, memories, thoughts, smells, anything like that, what you would change about Sioux City, what you like about Sioux City, how do you feel about our water quality and the environment. What are some of those ideas that you guys have felt or remembered or thought about throughout this? But also, how would you paint that? How would you tell that story? How would you write poetry about it? How would you create a zine or a sticker about it? I think that Jessica is probably the better person to lead this part of the conversation because it's artistic. So, but we would love to hear some of your guys' thoughts, how you're feeling about what you just heard. I don't think that this is new information to anybody, but if it is, like, I hope that you ask questions, but I'll hand this over to you.
Thank you. It's easier to talk about these things and have conversations with people in the world when you are informed. And even if we're just getting like a basic overview of some things that we can look into, I think that can be really helpful when you're out and some random person starts saying things and you can tell them why that's not true.